The morning sun painted the Montana sky orange as Jake Morrison saddled his horse. He had been running the Double M Ranch for 15 years, ever since his father passed away. The 2,000-acre spread was his life, his pride, and his burden all rolled into one. At 42, Jake was a man of few words but strong convictions. His weathered hands told stories of countless days spent mending fences, herding cattle, and fighting against nature's endless challenges. That Tuesday started like any other. Jake's border collie, Rex, bounded alongside his horse as they made their way to check the eastern pasture. The cattle had been restless lately, and Jake suspected coyotes might be prowling around the edges of his property. He carried his rifle as usual, along with a sharp hunting knife his grandfather had given him when he was 16. The eastern pasture stretched for miles, bordered by dense woodland that provided shelter for wildlife. Jake had always respected the natural balance between his ranch and the wild animals that called this land home. He never killed unnecessarily, taking only what threatened his livestock or what his family needed for food. As he rode deeper into the pasture, Jake noticed something unusual. Several of his cattle were bunched together near the old oak tree, their heads raised and ears alert. This was not normal behavior for grazing animals. Rex sensed it too, his tail stiffening as he sniffed the air with growing concern. Jake dismounted and approached the cattle on foot. The animals were clearly agitated, shifting nervously and letting out occasional low moose. He scanned the area, looking for signs of predators or anything else that might explain their behavior. That's when he heard it, a faint sound carried on the wind. At first, he thought it might be an injured animal. The sound was weak, almost like whimpering. Jake followed the noise, pushing through a thicket of bushes near the tree line. Rex stayed close, his instincts telling him something was very wrong. The sound grew louder as Jake moved deeper into the woods. His heart began to race as he realized this was not an animal sound at all. It was human. Someone was crying, and the voice sounded young and terrified. Jake quickened his pace, branches catching at his clothes as he pushed through the undergrowth. The crying was coming from somewhere ahead, beyond a fallen log that blocked his view. He could hear words now, though they were muffled and broken by sobs. "Please, someone, help me." The voice was definitely female, and it sounded like she was in serious trouble. Jake's protective instincts kicked in immediately. Living this far from town, he had helped lost hikers and stranded motorists before, but something about this situation felt different. The fear in the voice was raw and desperate. As Jake rounded the fallen log, he stopped dead in his tracks. About 20 feet ahead, partially hidden by a cluster of pine trees, he could see a small structure. It looked like an old hunting cabin, probably abandoned for years, but smoke was rising from its chimney and the crying was definitely coming from inside. Jake approached carefully, his hand instinctively moving to the knife on his belt. He had no idea what he was walking into, but every fiber of his being told him that someone inside that cabin needed help desperately. The cabin was in rough condition, with boarded-up windows and a sagging roof. It looked like it had been empty for decades, yet someone was clearly using it now. Jake could hear movement inside, along with the continued sobbing. He reached the front door, which was secured with a heavy padlock and chain. The crying was much louder now, and he could make out words more clearly. "Get me out of here," the voice pleaded. "Please, somebody help me." I can't take this anymore." Jake's blood ran cold. This was not just someone who was lost or injured. This was someone who was being held against their will. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had stumbled upon a kidnapping situation right here on his own land. His mind raced as he considered his options. The nearest phone was back at the ranch house, at least 30 minutes away by horseback. The sheriff's office was another hour beyond that. Whoever was inside that cabin might not have that much time. Jake examined the door more closely. The padlock was heavy-duty, but the wood around the hinges was old and rotted. He might be able to break it down, but he had no idea what he would find on the other side. Was the kidnapper still inside? Was this person alone, or were there others? The crying continued, and Jake made his decision. He could not leave this person trapped while he rode for help. Every minute could matter. Jake pulled out his hunting knife and began working at the rotted wood around the door hinges. The blade was sharp, and the old wood gave way more easily than he expected. As he worked, he called out softly, "Hey, can you hear me? My name is Jake. I'm going to get you out of there." The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by urgent whispers. "Oh God, yes, please help me. There's a man. He's been gone for about an hour, but he'll be back soon. Please hurry. Jake's hands moved faster, carving away chunks of rotted wood. The voice sounded young, maybe teenage, and absolutely terrified. He wondered how long she had been trapped in there and what kind of monster would do such a thing. As he worked on the second hinge, Jake heard something that made his blood freeze. The distant sound of a vehicle approaching through the woods. Someone was coming, and it was not going to be good news. He's coming back, the voice inside whispered frantically. Please, you have to get me out now. If he finds you here, Jake did not wait to hear the rest. He grabbed the door and pulled with all his strength. The rotted hinges gave way with a loud crack, and the door swung open. What Jake saw inside that dark cabin would haunt him for the rest of his life. But at that moment, all he could think about was getting this person to safety before whoever was driving that vehicle arrived. Rex began barking frantically from outside, and Jake knew they were almost out of time. Jake's eyes took a moment to adjust to the darkness inside the cabin. What he saw made his stomach turn and his hands clench into fists. A young girl, probably no more than 16, was chained to the wall by her ankle. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her face streaked with tears and bruises. She looked like she had not eaten a proper meal in days. But it was her eyes that hit Jake the hardest. They held a mixture of desperate hope and absolute terror. She had been through hell, and she knew it was far from over. Please, she whispered, extending her free hand toward him. The key is on the table over there. Hurry, please hurry. Jake spotted the key immediately and grabbed it, his hands shaking as he unlocked the shackle around her ankle. The metal had rubbed her skin raw, leaving angry red marks that made Jake's jaw tighten with rage. The sound of the approaching vehicle was getting closer. Jake could hear the engine struggling through the rough terrain, maybe 5 minutes away at most. Can you walk? Jake asked, helping the girl to her feet. She nodded, though her legs were clearly weak from being confined. I think so. But he has a gun, and he's not alone. There are 2 of them. Jake's mind raced. 2 armed men. And he had only his rifle back with his horse and the hunting knife on his belt. Getting to his horse would mean crossing open ground where they could be easily spotted. What's your name? Jake asked as he supported her weight. Sarah, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah Mitchell. I live in Billings. They took me from the parking lot at my school 3 days ago. 3 days. Jake felt sick thinking about what this girl had endured for 3 days. But there was no time to process that now. He could hear the vehicle much closer, maybe 2 minutes away. Listen to me, Sarah, we're going to get out of here, but I need you to be brave for just a little longer. Can you do that? Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Despite everything she had been through, Jake could see strength in her. She was a survivor. Jake led her to the back of the cabin where he discovered a small window that had been boarded up from the outside. Using his knife, he quickly pried away enough boards to create an opening big enough for them to crawl through. You first, Jake said, boosting Sarah up to the window. She squeezed through with difficulty, her weakened state making every movement a struggle. Just as Jake was climbing through behind her, he heard the vehicle come to a stop outside the cabin. Car doors slammed and he could hear voices. What the hell happened to the door? A rough voice shouted. Someone's been here. Another voice replied, this one higher-pitched and nervous. Check inside, quick. Jake dropped to the ground behind the cabin and grabbed Sarah's hand. They needed to move fast, but she could barely walk. The woods behind the cabin were thick, offering good cover, but Sarah would never be able to keep up if they had to run. Is there anywhere close we can hide? Sarah whispered, her breathing labored. Jake thought quickly. About 200 yards deeper into the woods was an old mine shaft abandoned since the 1950s. It was dangerous, but it might be their only option. There's a place, Jake said, but we need to move now. From inside the cabin came the sound of shouting and cursing. The kidnappers had discovered their prisoner was gone. Jake knew they would start searching the area immediately. Supporting Sarah's weight, Jake began moving as quickly as possible through the dense undergrowth. Every step seemed to make too much noise. Every broken branch sounded like a gunshot in the silence of the forest. Behind them, they could hear the men spreading out to search. One was calling to the other, coordinating their efforts. These were not amateurs. They knew what they were doing. There are tracks here, one of the voices called out. Fresh ones heading into the woods. Jake's heart sank. He had hoped the thick carpet of pine needles would hide their trail, but apparently these men knew how to track. Sarah stumbled, her legs finally giving out completely. Jake caught her before she could fall, but he knew she could not go much further. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face again. I'm so sorry. I can't. My legs won't work. It's okay, Jake said, though his mind was racing for alternatives. You've been incredibly brave. We'll figure this out. The mine shaft was still at least 100 yards away and Sarah could not make it. Jake could hear the kidnappers getting closer, following their trail with disturbing accuracy. Jake made a decision that went against every protective instinct he had. He was going to have to leave Sarah hidden while he led the kidnappers away from her. Listen carefully, he whispered, guiding Sarah behind a large fallen tree. I'm going to hide you here, then lead them in a different direction. When they follow me, you need to stay perfectly still and quiet. No matter what you hear, don't move until I come back for you. What if you don't come back? Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. Jake looked at this brave girl who had already survived so much. He could not lie to her, but he also could not let her lose hope. I will come back, he said firmly. That's a promise. But if something happens if you don't see me by nightfall, you need to head that way. He pointed toward the north. Keep walking until you hit a fence line, then follow it west. It will lead you to my ranch house. My wife Emma will be there. Tell her Jake sent you. Sarah nodded, though tears were flowing freely now. She understood that Jake was about to risk his life for hers. Jake helped her get as comfortable as possible behind the fallen tree, then covered her with branches and leaves. Unless someone looked very carefully, she would be invisible. The voices were getting closer. Jake could make out words now. Trail goes this way, toward the old mining area. Good. Fewer places to hide up there. Jake's blood chilled. They knew about the mine shaft. His plan to hide Sarah there would have been a disaster. Taking a deep breath, Jake stood up and began moving away from Sarah's hiding spot, making sure to leave an obvious trail. He broke branches, disturbed the ground, and even left a piece of his shirt hanging on a thorn bush. He was betting his life that these men would follow the clearer trail and assume Sarah was still with him. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was the only chance she had. Jake continued deeper into the woods, leading the kidnappers away from Sarah with each step. He could hear them following, their voices getting closer. Soon he would have to make his stand. The hunting knife felt small and inadequate in his hand, but it was all he had. Somewhere behind him, 2 armed men were tracking him through the forest. And somewhere behind them, a terrified 16-year-old girl was counting on him to save her life. Jake Morrison had always been a man who faced his problems head-on. Today would be no different, even if it might be his last day on Earth. Jake moved through the woods with purpose, making sure his trail was easy to follow while putting as much distance as possible between the kidnappers and Sarah's hiding spot. Every 100 yards or so, he would break a branch or leave another obvious sign that someone had passed this way. The terrain was getting rougher as he climbed higher into the hills. Large boulders and steep drop-offs created natural obstacles, but they also provided potential hiding spots. Jake knew these woods better than most people, having hunted and hiked through them since he was a boy. Behind him, he could hear the kidnappers making steady progress. They were not trying to be quiet anymore, confident that they had their quarry cornered in the hills where escape routes were limited. Getting close now, one of them called out. Trail's fresh, maybe 10 minutes ahead of us. Jake's heart was pounding, but his mind remained clear. He had been in dangerous situations before, though never anything quite like this. During his time in the Army Reserve, he had learned that panic was the enemy of survival. Stay calm, assess your options, and never give up. The trail he was following led to a narrow canyon with steep walls on both sides. Jake knew that entering the canyon would be dangerous as it would limit his escape routes, but it might also give him a tactical advantage. The narrow passage would force the kidnappers to approach single file, making it harder for them to use their superior numbers. As Jake reached the mouth of the canyon, he heard something that made him stop cold. A third voice coming from somewhere ahead of him. Got the north end covered, the voice called out. If they come this way, they'll run right into me. Jake's blood turned to ice. There were not 2 kidnappers, there were 3, and one of them had circled around to block his escape route. He was being herded into a trap. Crouching behind a large boulder, Jake tried to think of alternatives. Going back the way he came would mean running straight into the 2 men following his trail. Going forward meant facing the 3rd man who was waiting in ambush. Going left or right meant climbing nearly vertical rock faces that would leave him completely exposed. Jake pulled out his hunting knife and examined it in the fading afternoon light. It was a good blade, sharp and well-balanced, but it seemed pitifully small against 3 armed men. Still, it was what he had, and he was not going down without a fight. The voices behind him were getting closer. Jake estimated he had maybe 5 minutes before they reached his position. He needed to act fast. Looking up at the canyon walls, Jake spotted something that might work. About 15 feet up the left wall was a narrow ledge that ran along the canyon for maybe 30 yards. If he could reach it, he might be able to get above the man waiting in ambush ahead. The climb would be dangerous and exposed, but it was better than waiting here to be surrounded. Jake slipped his knife back into its sheath and began climbing. The rock was rough sandstone, providing decent handholds, but it was also crumbly in places. Twice, Jake felt chunks of rock give way beneath his weight, sending small avalanches of stones rattling down into the canyon below. "What was that?" one of the voices behind him called out. "Probably just loose rock," another replied. "Keep moving." Jake reached the ledge just as the first 2 kidnappers appeared at the mouth of the canyon below. From his elevated position, he could see them clearly for the first time. The first man was tall and lean, wearing military-style clothing and carrying what looked like a semi-automatic rifle. His movements were controlled and professional, suggesting military or law enforcement training. The second man was shorter and heavier, nervous-looking, and armed with a handgun. Jake could not see the third man from his current position, but he knew he was somewhere ahead, waiting. The 2 men below began moving cautiously into the canyon, their weapons ready. They were scanning the ground for tracks, but they had not thought to look up. Jake began moving along the ledge as quietly as possible, staying low to avoid being seen. His plan was to get ahead of them and hopefully spot the third man's position. About halfway along the ledge, Jake heard the third kidnapper call out from somewhere ahead. "You see anything yet?" "Trail goes straight through," the tall one replied. "They're probably hiding behind one of these rocks up ahead." Jake continued along the ledge until he spotted the third man's position. He was crouched behind a large boulder about 40 yards into the canyon, his rifle trained on the narrow passage. This one was older than the other 2, with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent years in the outdoors. Jake was now positioned above and slightly behind the ambush position. If he could get down quietly, he might be able to surprise the third man before the other 2 reached them. The descent was even more treacherous than the climb had been. Jake had to lower himself down the rock face while trying to remain silent. Sweat dripped into his eyes as he concentrated on each handhold, knowing that a single mistake would mean a fatal fall or would alert the kidnappers to his position. Jake reached the canyon floor about 20 feet behind the third man's position. The kidnapper was completely focused on watching the passage ahead, waiting for his quarry to walk into his sights. Moving with the stealth he had learned during his hunting expeditions, Jake crept closer. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows in the canyon, providing cover for his approach. When Jake was about 10 feet away, the third man suddenly turned around. "What the?" he started to say, but Jake was already moving. Jake launched himself forward, tackling the older man before he could bring his rifle to bear. They hit the ground hard, rolling and struggling for control of the weapon. The older man was strong and experienced, but Jake had the advantage of surprise and desperation. He managed to wrestle the rifle away and flung it out of reach. "Help!" the older man shouted. "He's here! Behind the rocks!" Jake heard the other 2 kidnappers running toward them, their boots echoing off the canyon walls. He had maybe 30 seconds before they arrived. The older man reached for a knife of his own, and Jake saw that this was going to be a fight to the death. There would be no reasoning with these people, no negotiating for Sarah's freedom. They had kidnapped a 16-year-old girl and were prepared to kill anyone who tried to stop them. Jake pulled out his hunting knife just as the older man lunged at him with his blade. The 2 knives met with a metallic clash that rang through the canyon like a bell. What happened next would determine whether Sarah Mitchell ever saw her family again. Jake Morrison, rancher and father, was fighting for more than just his own life. He was fighting for the life of an innocent girl who had already suffered far too much. The sound of running footsteps was getting closer, and Jake knew that his window of opportunity was closing fast. Whatever he was going to do, he had to do it now. But as he looked into the cold, calculating eyes of the man he was fighting, Jake Morrison saw something that stopped him cold. Something that would change everything about how this confrontation would end. Jake stared into the face of the older man and felt his world shift beneath his feet. The weathered features, the scar above the left eyebrow, the distinctive gray eyes, he knew this face. It was older, harder, marked by years of violence and crime. But Jake recognized it from family photographs that his mother had kept hidden in her bedroom drawer. This was his brother Marcus, who had disappeared 25 years ago after getting involved with the wrong crowd in Denver. Marcus Morrison, who their parents had mourned as dead, who Jake had spent years wondering about, hoping he might someday come home. "Marcus?" Jake whispered, his knife hand wavering. The older man's eyes widened in recognition, and for just a moment the hardness in his face cracked. "Little brother?" The sound of approaching footsteps snapped both men back to reality. The other two kidnappers would be here any second. And this bizarre family reunion was happening in the middle of a life-or-death situation. "Jake, you need to get out of here," Marcus said urgently, lowering his own knife. "These people I'm with, they're not going to listen to reason. They'll kill you without hesitation." "I can't leave," Jake replied, his mind reeling from the discovery. "They have a girl, Marcus. A 16-year-old kid named Sarah. I can't just walk away." Marcus's face went pale. "Sarah? You mean the Mitchell girl? You know who she is?" "Jake, you don't understand. Her father is a federal prosecutor. He's been going after the organization I work for. This whole thing, taking the girl, it's supposed to force him to drop his case." The other two kidnappers rounded the corner, their weapons drawn. When they saw Jake and Marcus talking instead of fighting, they both raised their rifles. "What's going on here, Marcus?" the tall one demanded. "Why haven't you taken care of this guy?" Marcus stood slowly, his hands visible. "This is my brother Tommy, my little brother Jake." Tommy, the tall kidnapper, laughed coldly. "I don't care if he's your twin. He's seen us, he knows about the girl. He's a liability." "We can work something out," Marcus said desperately. Jake won't say anything. "Will you, Jake?" Jake looked at his brother, this stranger who shared his blood but had chosen a path that led to kidnapping innocent children. The years had changed Marcus beyond recognition, turning him into someone Jake never could have imagined. "Let the girl go," Jake said quietly. "Whatever her father did, she doesn't deserve this." Tommy raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Jake's chest. "See, Marcus? He's not going to cooperate. We need to clean this up now." "Wait," the shorter, nervous kidnapper said. "Maybe we can use this. If he's Marcus's brother, he might be useful. We could use him as leverage, too." Jake saw his chance. While the three criminals were discussing his fate, he slowly reached for a loose rock on the ground behind him. "I've got a better idea," Jake said, drawing their attention. "You want to get to Prosecutor Mitchell? I can help you do that without hurting his daughter." "How?" Tommy asked, though he kept his rifle trained on Jake. "Mitchell knows my family. My wife Emma and I have donated to his campaigns. If you let Sarah go, I can arrange a meeting with Mitchell. Tell him I have information about corruption in the sheriff's department or something. He'll come." Marcus was staring at his brother with a mixture of hope and horror. "Jake, don't do this. You don't know what these people are capable of." "I know what they've already done to that girl," Jake replied. "And I know I can't live with myself if I don't try to help her." Tommy considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "Too risky. Too many variables. We stick with the original plan." He began to squeeze the trigger, but Jake was already moving. The rock he had been gripping flew through the air, striking Tommy in the face and causing him to stumble backward. At the same time, Jake dove behind the boulder where Marcus had been hiding. Gunshots echoed through the canyon as Tommy fired wildly, the bullets striking rocks and sending chips of stone flying in all directions. "You idiot," Marcus shouted at Tommy. "You'll bring every cop in the county down on us with that noise. Then we better finish this fast," Tommy replied, wiping blood from his nose where the rock had hit him. Jake crouched behind the boulder, his mind racing. His desperate gambit had bought him a few seconds, but he was still outnumbered 3-1, and they had all the firepower. But something had changed in those few moments. Marcus had positioned himself between Tommy and Jake's hiding spot, and Jake could see his brother's internal struggle playing out in his posture and movements. "Marcus, get out of the way," Tommy ordered. "I'm ending this now." "No," Marcus said firmly. "We're doing this wrong. Jake's right about one thing. If we hurt the girl, Mitchell will never negotiate. He'll want blood, but if we can get to him directly—" "You're getting soft in your old age," the nervous kidnapper said. "We don't have time for this family reunion garbage." Marcus turned to face his two partners, and Jake saw something in his brother's stance that reminded him of the boy he had once known. The boy who had stood up to bullies in school, who had protected Jake from neighborhood kids who picked on him for being small. 25 years I've been running with crews like this, Marcus said. 25 years of looking over my shoulder, sleeping with one eye open, hurting people for money. I'm tired of it. What are you saying? Tommy demanded. I'm saying maybe it's time I remembered who I used to be before I became who I am now. Jake held his breath, understanding that the next few moments would determine not just his own fate, but Sarah's as well. His brother Marcus stood at a crossroads, choosing between the criminal he had become and the family he had abandoned. The canyon was eerily quiet, except for the echo of their voices off the rock walls. Somewhere in the distance, Jake could hear his dog Rex barking, probably still waiting by his horse. The sound reminded him of everything he was fighting for: his ranch, his wife, his peaceful life, and the innocent girl who was counting on him. Marcus made his decision. Jake, he called out. When I give you the signal, you run back the way you came. Don't stop, don't look back. Get to your horse and ride for help. What about Sarah? I'll handle Sarah, just be ready to move. Tommy was raising his rifle again, but this time he was pointing it at Marcus. You're making a big mistake, old man. Marcus smiled sadly. No, Tommy. The big mistake was 25 years ago when I first decided that money was more important than family. What happened next changed everything Jake thought he knew about redemption, sacrifice, and the bonds between brothers. Marcus Morrison moved faster than a man his age should have been able to. In one fluid motion, he spun around and tackled Tommy, driving both of them to the ground just as the rifle discharged. The bullet meant for Jake ricocheted harmlessly off the canyon wall. Go! Marcus shouted to Jake while wrestling with Tommy for control of the rifle. Get out of here now! But Jake could not abandon his brother, not after 25 years of wondering what had happened to him. Instead of running, Jake charged forward to help Marcus against the two remaining kidnappers. The nervous kidnapper, caught off guard by Marcus's sudden betrayal, fumbled with his handgun. Jake reached him before he could get a clear shot, tackling him around the waist and driving him backward into the canyon wall. The impact knocked the wind out of both of them, but Jake recovered first. He grabbed the kidnapper's wrist and slammed it against the rock until the man dropped his gun. Meanwhile, Marcus and Tommy were locked in a desperate struggle for the rifle. Both men were strong and experienced fighters, but Marcus was older and had been caught by surprise by his own decision to switch sides. Tommy managed to get on top of Marcus and was slowly turning the rifle toward him. You stupid old fool, he snarled. Did you really think you could just walk away from this life? Jake saw his brother was in trouble, but before he could help, the nervous kidnapper recovered and threw a wild punch that caught Jake in the jaw. Stars exploded in Jake's vision and he stumbled backward. The kidnapper pressed his advantage, pulling out a knife and lunging at Jake, but Jake's years of hard ranch work had made him tough and quick. He sidestepped the attack and grabbed the man's knife hand, using his momentum to throw him to the ground. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the canyon. Jake spun around, expecting the worst, but saw that Marcus had managed to turn the tables on Tommy. The rifle was now in Marcus's hands, smoking from the recent shot, and Tommy was clutching his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. Stay down, Marcus ordered, keeping the rifle trained on his former partner. The nervous kidnapper took advantage of Jake's momentary distraction to scramble for his dropped handgun, but Jake was on him immediately. They fought for control of the weapon, rolling around in the dirt and rocks of the canyon floor. During their struggle, the gun went off twice more, the bullets whining off the canyon walls. Finally, Jake managed to wrench the weapon away and toss it out of reach. Both kidnappers were now disarmed, but Jake knew this was far from over. Tommy was wounded but still dangerous, and there might be other members of their criminal organization who would come looking for them. Marcus, Jake called out, breathing heavily from the fight. We need to get Sarah and get out of here. There might be others. Marcus nodded grimly. There are others. This whole operation involves at least 6 people, maybe more. When we don't report back, they'll send someone to find us. How long do we have? Maybe an hour, maybe 2. Not long. Tommy, still clutching his wounded shoulder, looked up at Marcus with hatred in his eyes. You think this changes anything? You think saving your precious little brother makes up for all the things you've done? You're still the same scum you always were. Marcus stared down at the man he had worked with for 3 years. You're right about one thing. I can't change what I've done. But maybe I can change what happens next. Jake was already thinking ahead. We need to secure these two, then get back to Sarah. After that, we get everyone to safety and call the authorities. It's not that simple, Marcus said. The organization I work for has connections everywhere. Local cops, state police, even some federal agents. If we go through normal channels, Sarah and her family will never be safe. Then what do you suggest? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering their options. There's one guy I know who might help. Clean FBI agent named Rodriguez who's been trying to take down this organization for years. But reaching him means getting to a secure phone, and that means getting everyone out of these woods alive. Jake looked around the canyon, taking stock of their situation. They had 2 wounded and dangerous criminals to deal with, a traumatized kidnapping victim hidden in the woods, and unknown numbers of additional criminals who would soon be hunting them. First things first, Jake said. We need to tie these 2 up with something. Marcus searched through Tommy's pockets and found zip ties, probably intended for restraining victims. Professional kidnappers always come prepared, he said grimly as he secured both men's hands behind their backs. You're both dead men, Tommy growled. The organization doesn't forget and it doesn't forgive. Let me worry about the organization, Marcus replied. You just worry about whether you want to cooperate with the FBI or spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. Jake was already moving toward the mouth of the canyon. Come on. Sarah's been alone too long. She must be terrified. As they made their way back through the woods, Marcus filled Jake in on what he knew about the kidnapping operation. Sarah, Mitchell was taken specifically because her father has been prosecuting members of our organization. The idea was to hold her until he agreed to drop all charges and destroy his evidence. Our organization? Jake asked pointedly. Marcus had the grace to look ashamed. I've been running money for them mostly, moving cash from drug operations, setting up safe houses, coordinating transportation. I told myself I wasn't directly hurting anyone, but I was wrong. Every dollar I moved, every safe house I arranged, it all contributed to operations like this one. Jake felt a mixture of anger and sadness as he listened to his brother's confession. The Marcus he remembered from childhood would never have been involved in something like this, but 25 years of bad choices had led them to this moment. What changed your mind? Jake asked as they picked their way through the thick undergrowth. Why help me now? Marcus was quiet for several steps before answering. When I saw that girl in the cabin, chained up like an animal crying for help, she reminded me of our sister Jenny when she was that age. I realized I had become exactly the kind of monster that our father always warned us about. Jake remembered Jenny, their younger sister who had died in a car accident when she was 17. The tragedy had torn their family apart and eventually led to Marcus running away from home. They were getting close to where Jake had hidden Sarah, and he could hear Rex barking frantically in the distance. The dog's distress was clearly audible, which meant something was wrong. That's my dog, Jake said, breaking into a run. Something's happened. They reached the fallen tree where Jake had left Sarah, but she was gone. There were signs of a struggle, broken branches and disturbed earth. Fresh tire tracks led away through the trees toward an old logging road. No, Jake said, dropping to his knees beside the hiding spot. He had promised Sarah he would come back for her, and now she was gone again. Marcus examined the tracks, with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years avoiding law enforcement. 2 vehicles, maybe 3 people. They found her about 20 minutes ago, judging by how fresh these tracks are. How did they know where to look? GPS tracker, Marcus said grimly, pulling a small electronic device from his pocket. Standard procedure for operations like this. They've been tracking our movements the whole time. Jake stared at the device, understanding dawning on him. They let us escape from the canyon. They wanted us to lead them back to Sarah. Looks that way, which means they now have what they came for, and we're expendable. Rex appeared through the trees, running toward them with his tail low and his ears back. The dog was clearly distressed, whimpering and pawing at Jake's legs. It's okay, boy, Jake said, scratching behind the dog's ears. You did your best. But Rex was trying to tell them something. He kept running a few steps toward the logging road, then coming back to Jake and barking. He wants us to follow, Marcus realized. Dogs can track better than humans. He might be able to lead us to where they took her. Jake looked at his brother, this stranger who had once shared his childhood, who had spent decades running from his past and was now trying to make amends for his mistakes. This is insane, Jake said. We don't even know how many of them there are or what kind of weapons they have. I know, Marcus replied, but that girl is counting on us, and frankly, after 25 years of being on the wrong side of situations like this, I'd rather die trying to do the right thing than live knowing I walked away. Jake thought about his wife Emma, waiting at home, probably starting to worry about why he was so late getting back from checking the cattle. He thought about the safe, predictable life he had built on the ranch, far from the violence and chaos that seemed to follow his brother wherever he went. But he also thought about Sarah Mitchell, a 16-year-old girl who had done nothing wrong, except be born to a father who was trying to put criminals behind bars. She had already spent 3 days in hell, and now she was back in the hands of people who would not hesitate to kill her if it served their purposes. All right, Jake said, standing up and checking his knife. But we do this smart. No more charging in blind. We scout their position first, figure out what we're up against, and make a real plan. Marcus smiled, and for just a moment, Jake could see the brother he remembered from their childhood. You always were the smart one in the family. Rex was already moving down the logging road, following a scent trail that was invisible to human senses. The two brothers followed, walking side by side for the first time in 25 years. Jake, Marcus said quietly as they walked, I need you to know that whatever happens next, I'm sorry. Sorry for leaving. Sorry for the choices I made. Sorry for bringing this danger to your doorstep. Save the apologies for after we get Sarah back, Jake replied. Right now, I need you to tell me everything you know about these people. Their tactics, their weapons, their weaknesses, everything. As they followed Rex deeper into the woods, Marcus began sharing information that would either save Sarah Mitchell's life or get all three of them killed. The sun was starting to set, painting the forest in shades of orange and red, and Jake knew they were running out of time. Somewhere ahead, criminals were holding an innocent girl, waiting for her father to destroy evidence that could put them all in prison, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated what two brothers would do to protect someone who could not protect herself. The final confrontation was coming, and Jake Morrison was about to discover just how far he was willing to go to save a life. Rex led them along the old logging road for nearly 2 miles, his nose to the ground and his body tense with purpose. The dog had always been intelligent, but Jake had never seen him track with such determination. It was as if Rex understood that a life hung in the balance. As they walked, Marcus shared what he knew about the criminal organization he had been working for. They called themselves the Riverside Syndicate, named after the area where they had started operations 15 years ago. They specialized in money laundering, drug trafficking, and intimidation, but kidnapping was relatively new for them. The boss is a man named Vincent Cole, Marcus explained in a low voice. Ex-military, served 3 tours in Afghanistan before getting discharged for excessive violence. He's smart, ruthless, and has zero tolerance for anyone who crosses him. How many people work for him? Active members? Maybe 20. But he has connections with other criminal organizations across 3 states. If he puts the word out, he can have 50 people hunting us within 12 hours. Jake absorbed this information grimly. They were not just facing a few desperate criminals, but a well-organized syndicate with resources and connections. What about weaknesses? Jake asked. Marcus thought for a moment. Cole has a temper. If you can make him angry, he sometimes makes poor decisions. Also, most of his people are in it for the money. If things get too dangerous, they'll run rather than fight to the death. And you? Will you run if things get too dangerous? Marcus met his brother's eyes. 25 years ago, I might have. But not today. Today, I stand and fight. Rex suddenly stopped and lowered his body close to the ground, his ears perked forward. Jake and Marcus immediately crouched beside him, following the dog's gaze through the trees. About a quarter-mile ahead, they could see buildings through the forest. It looked like an abandoned lumber mill, the kind of place that had once provided jobs for small towns throughout Montana before the industry moved elsewhere. Perfect location for what they're doing, Marcus whispered. Remote, abandoned, lots of buildings to hide in. Cole's used places like this before. Jake counted at least 5 separate structures, including what looked like the main mill building, several storage sheds, and an old office building. Smoke was rising from the chimney of the office building, suggesting that was where they were keeping Sarah. How do we get close enough to see what we're dealing with? Jake asked. There's a service road that runs behind the mill. If we circle around, we might be able to approach from the back without being seen. They left the main logging road and began working their way through dense forest toward the rear of the mill complex. The going was slow and difficult, as they had to avoid making noise while navigating through thick underbrush and over fallen logs. As they got closer, Jake could hear voices and the sound of vehicles. Through the trees, he glimpsed at least 3 cars parked near the main building, including a large SUV with tinted windows. That's Cole's vehicle, Marcus whispered, pointing to the SUV. Black Escalade with reinforced windows. He never goes anywhere without it. They found a position on a small hill overlooking the mill complex, hidden behind a cluster of pine trees. From here, they could see most of the buildings and watch the movements of the people below. Jake counted 6 men moving around the complex, all armed with various weapons ranging from handguns to assault rifles. They seemed relaxed and confident, not expecting any immediate threat. There, Marcus said quietly, pointing to the office building. 2nd floor window. You can see light behind those curtains. That's probably where they have Sarah. Jake studied the building, looking for potential approaches. The office building was 2 stories tall, with external stairs leading to the 2nd floor. There were windows on all sides, but most of them had been boarded up years ago when the mill closed. 2 guards on the ground floor, Jake observed. At least 1 more upstairs with Sarah. Maybe more we can't see. The question is, how do we get her out without getting all of us killed? Jake was quiet for several minutes, studying the layout of the buildings and the patterns of the guards' movements. An idea was forming in his mind, dangerous but possibly workable. What if we don't try to sneak in? Jake said finally. What do you mean? I mean, what if we walk right up to the front door? You're one of them, Marcus. They're expecting you to report back eventually. Marcus shook his head. They'll know something's wrong when Tommy and the other guy don't show up with me. So we tell them the truth partially. We ran into trouble in the canyon. The other 2 are injured and couldn't make it back. You need medical supplies and reinforcements. That might work for about 5 minutes, Marcus said doubtfully. But the moment they realize I'm not cooperating, 5 minutes might be all we need. While you're distracting them downstairs, I slip in through the back and get to Sarah. Jake, these people will kill you without hesitation if they catch you. Then we better make sure they don't catch me. As they finalized their plan, Jake felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. He had spent his entire adult life avoiding violence and conflict, building a peaceful existence on his ranch with his wife. But sometimes peace had to be defended with action. Rex seemed to sense the change in his master's mood. The dog pressed close to Jake's side, offering comfort and support. Jake scratched behind his ears and whispered, "You're going to have to wait here, boy. This is too dangerous for dogs." Rex whined softly but settled down among the pine trees, understanding that he needed to stay hidden. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked, checking the rifle he had taken from Tommy. "No," Jake said honestly, "but that doesn't matter. Ready or not, we're going to get that girl back." As the sun disappeared behind the western mountains, casting the mill complex in growing shadows, the 2 brothers prepared for what would likely be the most dangerous mission of their lives. Below them, criminals continued their casual patrol, unaware that their carefully planned kidnapping was about to face a challenge they never could have anticipated. Jake Morrison, the peaceful rancher who had never wanted anything more than to tend his cattle and live quietly with his wife, was about to become something he had never imagined being, a warrior fighting for the life of an innocent stranger. And his brother Marcus, who had spent 25 years running from his past and his family, was finally ready to stand and fight for something that mattered more than money or survival. The rescue attempt would begin in darkness, with only their wits, their determination, and their newfound partnership to see them through. Sarah Mitchell's life hung in the balance and time was running out. Darkness settled over the abandoned mill complex like a heavy blanket. Jake crouched in the shadows behind the office building, his heart pounding as he watched Marcus walk boldly toward the main entrance. The plan was simple, but so many things could go wrong. Marcus pushed through the front door as if he owned the place, immediately calling out in an annoyed voice. "Cole, we've got problems!" Jake could hear the conversation through the thin walls of the old building. "Where are Tommy and Richards?" a harsh voice demanded. This had to be Vincent Cole. "Holed up in a cave about 5 miles from here," Marcus replied smoothly. "Richards took a bullet in the leg. Tommy's got a concussion. Some rancher stumbled onto us and put up more of a fight than we expected." "You killed him?" "Eventually, but not before he got lucky with a few shots. Tommy needs medical attention and we need to move the girl before anyone else comes looking." Jake used the distraction to slip around to the back of the building. The external stairway to the second floor was old and creaky, but he managed to climb it without making too much noise. At the top of the stairs was a door that had been propped open with a cinder block, probably to provide ventilation. Jake could hear voices inside, and one of them was definitely female. "Please," Sarah was saying, her voice hoarse from crying. "I won't tell anyone anything. Just let me go home to my family." "Shut up," a male voice replied. "Your daddy should have thought about your family before he decided to mess with us." Jake peered through the crack in the door and saw the layout of the room. Sarah was sitting in a chair in the center, her hands tied behind her back. One guard was positioned near the window overlooking the parking area, while another sat at a small table cleaning his pistol. The guard by the window was the immediate threat. He would see Jake the moment he entered the room. But the guard at the table had his back to the door and seemed distracted by his weapon maintenance. Jake took a deep breath and made his move. He slipped through the door as quietly as possible, staying low and moving toward the guard at the table. His hunting knife was in his hand, though he hoped he would not have to use it. Jake was within 3 feet of the distracted guard when Sarah saw him. Her eyes widened in recognition and hope, but she had the presence of mind not to cry out or make any sudden movements that would alert her captors. The guard by the window was still looking outside, probably watching for Marcus's fictional wounded partners. Jake reached the table guard and pressed the knife to his throat. "Don't move," Jake whispered. "Don't make a sound." The guard froze, his pistol only half assembled on the table in front of him. The guard by the window was starting to turn around, having heard something. "Hey Martinez, did you hear?" Jake was already moving. He released the first guard and dove toward the window guard, tackling him before he could raise his weapon. They crashed to the floor, struggling for control of the rifle. "Get the gun," Jake called to Sarah, nodding toward the pistol parts on the table. But Sarah's hands were still tied behind her back. She could not reach the weapon. The guard Jake was fighting managed to get his rifle between them and was pushing it toward Jake's throat, trying to strangle him with the weapon's strap. Jake could feel his air supply being cut off. Martinez, the guard who had been at the table, was recovering from his surprise and reaching for another weapon from a holster at his belt. Just as everything seemed lost, the door burst open and Marcus stormed in, his rifle ready. "Everyone freeze," he shouted. But the situation had already spun out of control. Shouts were coming from downstairs as the other criminals realized something was wrong. Heavy footsteps pounded up the external stairway. "The window," Marcus said quickly. "Fire escape on the south side. Can you make it?" Jake had managed to subdue the guard he was fighting, but Martinez was now pointing his gun at Sarah. "Nobody moves, or the girl dies," Martinez said, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "You shoot her, and you lose all your leverage," Marcus pointed out calmly. "Cole needs her alive. Cole needs her father to cooperate. Dead daughter sends just as strong a message." Jake saw the standoff developing and knew it could only end badly. Martinez was scared and trigger-happy. Marcus was trying to play both sides, and more armed criminals were coming up the stairs. That's when Sarah Mitchell showed the courage that had kept her alive through 3 days of captivity. Instead of freezing in terror, she suddenly threw herself sideways off the chair, rolling away from Martinez and creating chaos in the small room. Her movement startled Martinez just enough for Jake to lunge forward and tackle him. The gun went off, but the bullet went wide, shattering a window instead of finding a human target. Marcus was already at Sarah's side, cutting the ropes that bound her hands. "Can you run?" he asked urgently. "Yes," she said, though her legs were shaky from being tied up for so long. "Fire escape now," Marcus ordered, pushing Sarah toward the window. Jake was still struggling with Martinez when the door exploded inward, and 3 more armed men rushed in. Marcus spun around, his rifle chattering as he laid down covering fire. "Go!" Marcus shouted to Jake and Sarah. "I'll hold them off." Jake grabbed Sarah and pushed her toward the shattered window. The fire escape was old and rusty, but it was their only chance. Sarah climbed through first with Jake right behind her. As they started down the fire escape, Jake could hear gunfire erupting in the room above them. "Marcus!" Jake called out, but there was no response except more gunfire. They reached the ground level and Jake grabbed Sarah's hand. "Can you run?" "I'll try," she said, though she was clearly exhausted and weak. They ran toward the tree line where Jake had left Rex. Behind them, the mill complex erupted in chaos as more criminals poured out of the buildings, searching for the escaped prisoner. Rex bounded out of the shadows, tail wagging furiously at seeing Jake safe, but Jake's relief was tempered by the knowledge that Marcus was still trapped in the building above. "We have to help him," Jake said, looking back at the mill. "No," Sarah said firmly, grabbing Jake's arm. "He told us to go. He's buying us time to escape. Don't waste his sacrifice." Jake knew she was right, but leaving his brother behind felt like abandoning him all over again. The sound of an approaching helicopter cut through the night air. Jake looked up to see searchlights sweeping the forest, but these were not criminal helicopters, they were law enforcement. "How did they find us?" Sarah asked. Jake pulled out the GPS tracker Marcus had shown him earlier, the one the criminals had been using to follow their movements. Sometimes the things that trap you can also set you free. As FBI agents swarmed the mill complex, Jake Morrison held Sarah Mitchell in his arms while she cried with relief. Rex pressed against both of them, sensing that the danger had finally passed. Later, Jake would learn that Marcus had survived the gunfight and was cooperating fully with federal investigators. His information would help break up the Riverside Syndicate and put Vincent Cole behind bars for the rest of his life. Sarah Mitchell would eventually testify against her kidnappers, showing the same courage in the courtroom that she had displayed during her escape. Her father's prosecution of the syndicate would be successful, and Sarah would go on to become a victims' rights advocate, helping other families who had faced similar ordeals. And Jake Morrison would return to his ranch, to his wife Emma, and to his quiet life. But he would never forget the 3 days that had changed everything. The days when he discovered that sometimes the greatest courage comes from ordinary people who refuse to let evil triumph. The old hunting knife, the one his grandfather had given him, would go back into its drawer. But Jake would always remember that when it mattered most, when an innocent life hung in the balance, he had found the strength to fight for what was right. Sometimes that's all any of us can do. Stand up when standing up matters, fight when fighting is necessary, and never give up on the people who need us most.